Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma Daf Yudalid. Today's daf is sponsored by Debbie Engel and Eagles in honor of the first birthday of her grandson Tomer of Me'avi Eslim, and for the safe return from battle of his father and of all our chayalim and chayalot. May Hashem strengthen them, bring them victory, and bring them and the hostages home to their families safely and soon. Amen. Okay, we're going to get started now with the bottom of our daf. Where did we end up? We started with this machloket between Rabbi Elazar and Rav Chisda. Okay, the Mishna had said Ureshut Hanizak of Hamazik, and we weren't clear. Did that go on the previous line, which meant just like you're not obligated if Ruth's shore goes into, if Naomi's shore goes into Ruth's property and Ruth's shore damages her, well, she's not responsible because Ruth can say, what were you doing bringing your shore into my property? Likewise, if they jointly own place, then also you're not going to be responsible. That's one answer, and that's Rabbi Elazar, who says the way to read that line is you're exempt, which means that the next line, which said when someone damages, they have to pay with the best of their land, is something entirely different, and then we have to say what's that line coming to include. The second option was Rav Chisda, who reads the Mishnah as Ruth is going to be exempt if Naomi brought her stuff into Ruth's house and Ruth's shore damaged. But if it's jointly owned property, she's going to be responsible. And then, how do we read that next line? Reshut hamazik v'hanizak, kishechav hamazik. The last line is coming to explain that line. It's saying, and in this case, you're liable to pay and with the best of your land. So there's two ways to read that last line. If you read the last line the first way, according to Rabbi Elazar, then we have a problem because the question is, what is that last line coming to say? So we suggested one possibility is it comes to say, Karen wasn't included in the Mishnah. If you're Rav and you hold that Mave is shore, and then you have shore means regel, the other one means shane, right? Mave is shane, is teeth. So we have regel, shane. We don't have Karen. This line comes to, because remember, it reads this Mishnah and the previous Mishnah as one continuum. And then this line is unnecessary because this line also ended the previous Mishnah. So it's an unnecessary line. It must be coming to include an additional case. Because if you remember, both this Mishnah and the previous Mishnah ended with this line, and when you pay the highest damages. That's why this line doesn't really make any sense. Second option is to say, again, it's really the third option. First option is to say it's a continuation of the line before. And what it's saying is, when it's joint, you're liable. But if you hold like Rabbi Elazar and you don't think you're liable, then you have to read it some other way. So either you read it like Rav, which, did I say it wrong? I said it like Shmuel, Either you read it like Shmuel. Sorry, my mistake. But shane, the Mave is shane, which means you have regel and shane in the Mishnah. This Mishnah comes to include Karen. Or if you say like Rav, which is shore includes shane, regel, and Karen, then what's this coming to include? To which we said it's coming to include shomrim, and we brought a bright to the top of it. But we didn't really understand the bright yet, so now we're going to go back and read the bright. So Kisha, the first line of the bright is Kishi zik chav hamazik. I'm now in the words Amar Mar, about 7 lines from the end of yesterday's daf. Kishizik chav hamazik. What is that coming to include? According to the bright, lahavi shomer chinam bashoel nosei sachar v'asuker. The 4 shomrim. These are people who are watching your item. They have different levels of responsibility. We'll talk about the shoel, which has the most responsibility because that's the example they're going to bring right now. A shoel is responsible for everything. If I borrow your car and some crazy thing happens and, let's say, first of all, someone steals it, I'm responsible. Anyway, some of the other shomrim are responsible. That's the whole idea of watching something is to protect it from theft. But if someone comes unexpectedly, the car was parked in my garage and someone smashes somehow into it, opens my garage, comes into the garage, or I don't want to talk about crazy honest, but some sort of unexpected circumstance, maybe it's in my driveway in a normal parking spot, and someone smashes into your car where it's not my fault, I put it in a good spot, it was protected, it was this, then I'm still responsible because all the benefits are mine. I don't pay and I get to use your car. So basically I'm fully responsible. So now, and I specifically explained that because we're going to get into this case now of a borrower. So the Gemara wants to know, hey chidami, in what case, what's the case where you're going to be responsible for damages in a case of shomrim? Okay, it could be all sorts of possible things. So, okay, let's talk about a dog. Okay, that's the easiest example. We don't really have pet shores, pet oxen. We don't usually use them nowadays. So let's talk about something more typical. So Ruth goes away on vacation and she gives her dog to Naomi to watch. And Naomi has her own dog. Okay, so while the dogs are in Naomi's house, Ruth's dog attacks Naomi's dog. Okay? Now, if that's the case, and Naomi wants to say to Ruth, hey, listen, well, the truth is we're talking here about Shane and Regel, so maybe we should talk about, well, maybe not, but let's go with Shane and Regel because that's what we were talking about in Chatzara Shutafim. But the truth is it doesn't really matter. So lemale, ilu azik ba'alma, in other words, Ruth can say, listen, ilu azik ba'alma, ba'it l'shlume at. In other words, if, while you're watching my dog, Ruth says to her, right now, what happened? Ruth's dog attacked Naomi's dog. What if Ruth's dog went next door to the next door neighbor and attacked the next door neighbor's dog? Who would be responsible? Naomi. What is she doing if not watching the shore from damages, right? And watching the dog from damaging some other dog, right? Now, it's not exactly clear. We're going to get back to this, okay? But there's really two things Naomi's doing when she's watching the dog. First of all, she's feeding the dog. She's protecting the dog that no one attacks the dog. She's doing all sorts of things. But theoretically, while it's in Naomi's domain, if that dog attacks, Naomi's responsible, right? She's watching the dog. So if basically while she's watching the dog, Ruth's dog attacks Naomi's dog, how can Naomi claim damages to Ruth? And Ruth could say, listen, if the dog had attacked the next door neighbor's dog, if my dog had attacked the next door neighbor's dog, you, Naomi, would have needed to pay because you're watching my dog. So how could you possibly make me pay when it attacked your own dog? That's your responsibility. Okay, so that's what it would say here. Ilu azik ba'alma, if it had just damaged someone else, you, Naomi, would be responsible. You're watching my dog. So now they attack your dog, you're going to make me pay. Okay, so option 2. The other option is Naomi's watching Ruth's dog, and Naomi's dog attacks Ruth's dog. So now, if that's the case, well, now, if Naomi wants to say, listen, I'm not responsible, okay? The law is, what does the Mishna say? Or the way we're explaining the Mishna, or the Braita. Okay, the Braita said that which means Shomer Chinam, Shoel Socher, No Sechar, all these people are going to be obligated. Now, what are they going to be obligated? Well, if it's Shane and Regel, they're going to be obligated full damages. If it's Karen, she's going to be obligated half damages. So now let's imagine the case. Naomi's dog attacks Ruth's dog while she's watching Ruth's dog. According to, if we're going to view this as laws of nizakin, of damages, Naomi's going to have to pay half damages to Ruth for what Naomi's dog did to Ruth's dog, right? So she pays back Ruth half the value of the dog. And this is why we specifically brought a case of a shoel, because Ruth can say to her, what are you talking about? Why am I only getting about half the value of my dog? If Ruth can say, ilu itazik me'alma, ba'it l'shlume kulei Torah. If some fluke accident had happened and someone had run over the dog while it was, or I don't know, someone did something to the dog, it was totally unexpected, onus, okay? And basically, when I came back from vacation, you told me my dog was dead, you would have to pay me full damages because you're a shoel. You borrowed the dog. You were using the dog. You were, right, whatever, let's say it's a blind person. They were using the dog as a walking dog, They assume responsibility. Naomi assumes responsibility for everything, even onus. So now she's saying the fact that your dog attacked my dog and you want to get away with only paying half damages because your dog never did this before. Your dog's a short tom, a dog tom. Well, what are you talking about? You're chayav and onsim. You're chayav for anything. If you had done nothing, you would have had to pay full damages. Now that your dog attacked my dog, you're going to only pay half. So it can't be that case. So basically, we're going to now say, right? So here, hashid da'azik Torah didach. Now that you're short damage, palgan is what you're going to only try to pay me half damages. So basically, neither of these cases make sense. So we're stuck with, well, then what's the case? So to which the Gemara answers, la'olam da'azke Torah da'mashi l'Torah d'shoel. Really, it's that Ruth's dog really did attack Naomi's dog while Naomi was watching the dog. Now, what did we say before? Naomi wants to get Ruth to pay, and Ruth is liable. But Ruth can say, what are you talking about? You're watching my dog. Your job was to protect my dog from damages. If it had damaged in the next door neighbor's house, you would have had to pay. So why, if it damages your dog, do I need to pay? So the case must be where Naomi had said, I'll watch your dog, meaning I'll feed your dog, I'll protect your dog, but I'm not protecting your dog from damaging others. I'm not assuming that level of responsibility. Okay. And then we're splitting between those levels. And then, therefore, if Ruth's dog does go and attack, then Ruth is going to be responsible because Naomi never took that upon herself in terms of responsibility. So now they say, okay, that sounds fine, but we have a problem with the next line in the Mishna, in the Breita. The Breita said, which we didn't, right? The Breita said, Nifritza balayla, osha patua listim b'yatzavizika patur. Well, it said that if the dog gets out at night, or right, the wall breaks at night, or listim, robbers came and knocked down the wall and let the dogs out. So then she's not responsible. But if not, then she's responsible, right? So that's the line. Which seems to imply ha biyom chayav, that if it happened during the day, no, we would be responsible. Now, if we just said haloki belalav shmirat nezakav, but we just said that the first part of the Breita is talking about where Naomi didn't accept responsibility for the damages. And that's why Naomi has to pay. I'm sorry, that's why Naomi didn't accept the damages. That's why Ruth has to pay if her dog caused damage to Naomi. So how could you possibly, that next line makes no sense. Because the next line says you're not responsible if it happened at night, but if it happened during the day, you're responsible for damages. So the Gemara has to say that this Breita has a transition sentence in the middle. It's like one of those Chisur Machasra, it's missing words. Hachi Kamra, the Gemara says. This is how you should read the Breita. So the first line is, Naomi didn't accept responsibility. She was a shomrim, but accepted to watch the animal, but didn't accept to protect the animal from damaging others. But then, in kibel alav shmirat nezakav chayav, here comes the transition sentence. If she accepted responsibility for damages, then she would be obligated. However, not if nifritza balayla osha partzua listim yatzavizika patur. Only in that case, if Naomi accepted, not only will I watch your dog and feed your dog and take care of your dog, but I will protect your dog from damaging others, then she will be responsible, but not if the dog went out and damaged at night, or listim robbers came and opened the gate for the dog, then it would be a different story. Okay, so what we did so far was just really understand that Breita. We didn't understand what the Breita was talking about. Now we understand what the Breita means, which again was interpretation number 3 for what this line, kishizik, chavamazik tashlumei nezek, kimetava aretz. If I'm not quoting exactly right, but basically some along the lines, if you damage, you have to pay full damages. This must mean, or you have to pay damages, basically not necessarily full, depending on what it is, but you have to pay with the best of your land. Then the question is, what was this including that we didn't already know previously, and why was it repeating the same line that was in the previous Mishnah? The answer is it's coming to include a case of shomrim. And again, shomrim and now what's shomrim? If the one you're watching attacks something in your house, breaks your kelim, does something like that, then the original owner will have to pay, but only if you didn't accept responsibility of damages. If you accepted, Naomi accepted, I'll protect the dog from damaging, then not. And then the exception to that is, right, well, unless it happened at night, and then she won't be responsible if she really did accept damages. Now we're going to go back to this machloket Rabbi Elazar and Rav Chisda. Rabbi Elazar and Rav Chisda, and I recommend you use the study guide. It'll help with charts and all that. So we now have that, and so you're asking, what's a shomer chinam? I want to tell you, okay, I said this at the end of class yesterday after I stopped recording, so I'll say it now, which is right now we're really at the very beginning of this incredibly long Seder Nezikin, which is made of Bava Kamma, Bava Mitzia, and Bava Batra. And this Gemara, because the Gemara is not linear, it assumes that you know everything else. So it keeps making references constantly to sugyot that you have no idea, you don't understand them yet. So it's like the beginning of a movie when you don't really know what's going on yet. So what I want to say is you can hold a lot of your questions now because we don't have time to explain every single concept and every single thing ad sof, right, to the end. Like even yesterday, for example, the machloket, Rabbi Natan and the rabbis, like we didn't explain it fully. The Gemara is going to get into it and ask some questions like, why really did the Baal Bor need to pay the extra 25%? Why don't we make the Baal Shiur? If they're anyway responsible for half, why don't we make them pay half the damages in general? No. There's a lot of questions, and the Gemara is going to ask them as we get to each sugya, and we're going to understand them much better. It's very hard now in a 45-minute class to get to all these details of everything. So first of all, thank you, Julie. It's on the bookmark for Bava Mitzia. If you're looking for what's a shomer chinam, you can use the bookmarks. They'll help you with some major concepts. Because we're not going into the details of what these things are, I just don't want to spend the time on each one. And each one is, like I said, a world in and of itself. So, and just understand that as we go through the Bavas, it's going to just repeat concepts that we've seen in machlokot that we've seen. You'll understand them better the second, the third, the fourth time we get to those sugyas. Okay, so at this pace, it's hard to get to everything in depth. Okay. So now the question is, Rabbi Elazar says, if Ruth and Naomi jointly own a property and Ruth's ate Naomi's stuff, she's exempt for regel, okay, and shame. If she tramples, if she eats, she's exempt. Rav Chisda said she's obligated. So now the Gemara wants to ask on Rabbi Elazar, who says she's exempt. Ini, is this really true? Vahatani Rav Yosef. There's a brayta that Rav Yosef brought that says against this. Chatzara shutafim va'pundak. Okay, an inn. Okay, so either we both jointly own this field, or we're in a hotel where everybody has rights to be there. Hayav behen al hashem v'al regel. You are obligated for shem regel. Now remember, shem and regel in a public domain, you're not obligated. But this is not exactly a public domain, right? It's more public than just mine, but right, than just Naomi's reshut, but it is somewhat of a public domain. So tiyufta de Rabbi Elazar. So basically, according to this interpretation, you are obligated because it's not exactly a private domain. It's not a public domain. And this raises a question against Rabbi Elazar because it says chatzara shutafim chayav, and he said if it's jointly owned, you're patur. So Amar lecha Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar could say the following. V'tizbera matnita milo plige. What, you think there's no other brayta that says like me? You're throwing a brayta against me to question me. Remember, Rabbi Elazar, there's Rabbi Elazar who's a Tana, but that's not. This is Rabbi Elazar the Amora, because he's arguing with Rav Chisda, who's an Amora. And basically, he's going to say, you're quoting a brayta, I'll quote you a brayta that says like me. The Hatanya. Now, there's a very long brayta, and the Gemara later is going to go and try to understand all these cases, but let's just start by reading it and explaining it basically, and then we'll get more into it later. He categorized it into 4 general principles about whose domain and who's responsible for what. If it's Naomi's property only and not Ruth's, Ruth is obligated in everything. Okay, we're going to have to see what it means in everything. There's 2 possibilities, but we'll get to that in the Gemara soon. If it's Ruth's property, and Ruth's store damaged and Naomi brought her stuff in and Ruth's store damaged it, well, patur mikol, right? Ruth's not responsible. Oh, we saw this already, right? Ruth could say, well, what were you doing in my domain? Lezeh, this is our case, and this is why we brought this brayta. If it belongs to both, kigon, chatzara shutafim v'abika. Now, I want you to notice, it says here, like joint only property and a valley, okay, which is sort of private, not exactly, okay, but sort of private. Patur ba ala shem ba ala regel. Okay, now, both these are sort of private, but they're also sort of public, right? So this brayta says you're actually exempt. And that goes directly against what Rav Yosef quoted, which is chatzara shutafim v'pundak chayav behen ala shem ba ala regel. I want you to notice that there the example was a pundak, an inn, and here the example is a valley. Soon the Gemara is going to distinguish a little bit. But the chatzara shutafim seems to be the same. There it's joint, here it's joint. And this says like Rabbi Elazar. So that's what Rabbi Elazar could answer by this question they brought against him. And not only you patur and shem for regel, but ala negichav, ala negifav, ala nishichav, ala rebitzav, ala bita. This already is not relevant for our purposes. It's just interesting. Tam shalem chatzi nezek, muam shalem nezek shalem. Okay, if it's Karen damages, then it's half. If it's tam, it's full. If it's muam. Lo lezeh, that 4th case. Again, we could have stopped earlier because we really needed just that line. But lo lezeh, if it belongs to neither of them, kigon chatzer she'eno shel shnehem, it doesn't belong to Ruth, it doesn't belong to Naomi. Chayav bo ala shem v'ala regel, you're liable for shem v'regel. We're going to have to explain what case is this. Because theoretically, if it doesn't belong to either, what did we learn? When you obligate in shem v'regel, the pasuk said, "Ubi er b'steachil." You went into someone else's field. Someone else's field means Naomi's field. It doesn't mean some random person and damaged Naomi's property. No, it means you went into Naomi's field and damaged. So how could this property that doesn't belong to either be considered steachil? We're going to get back to this. And not only you chayav in regel and shen, but also nigicha, nishicha, nigifa, v'ribitzav ala b'ita, all the toladot of Karen. Again, tam shalem chatzi nezek, muam shalem nezek shalem. Okay, in that same case, when you'll be liable for shor and regel, if you remember, Karen, you're obligated even in the public domain. Shor and regel, you're not obligated in the public domain because, again, why'd you leave your food in the public domain? You know that animals go by and trample and eat and all that. Anyway, katani mia, why did we bring this whole on brayta? There you have the answer for Rabbi Elazar, that You bring this braita against me, well, I'll bring you a different braita. Now, the Gemara now is going to say, if we forget about saying that these are different opinions, like this matches that opinion, that matches that, because again, they both say chatzar shutafim, one said chayav shem berega, one said patur shem berega. So now the Gemara just points out kashin hadade. These braitot contradict each other. Now theoretically, the Gemara didn't need to say this because again, we just resolved it by saying one is one approach and one is a different approach. But since the Gemara has a different way to resolve the contradiction, therefore it's kind of the question is coming because they have an answer. So now they say, let's forget about that. We could use this as an answer for Rabbi Elazar, and he'll say, this is my approach, that's my approach. These sources both are talking about the exact same case, it seems, and they contradict. How are we going to resolve this? So, Kitanya hahi, b'chatzar miyuchedet lezeh v'lezeh, bein leperot, bein l'shvarim. The one that matches Rabbi Elazar that we said before, that said, you're exempt from shem v'regel, that must be a chatzir. We're now going to distinguish between two types of jointly owned fields. This field, it was jointly owned completely. Ruth and Naomi both can have their produce there. They can bring their shvarim there. It's a totally open, shared space for both. They have all equal rights, which means that's why it's going to be patra from shem v'regel, because it's more like going, Ruth, like since Ruth's animals have rights to be there and their produce, they have rights to they share their produce also, then even if this one's designated as mine, this one designated as yours, but everything was really shared. We all have rights to have our stuff there. And therefore, again, Naomi should have realized that Ruth's animals could eat it, and therefore Ruth can't be responsible. And Ahida Rav Yosef, the Braita that says you're responsible for chatzar shutafim, b'chatzar miyuchedet leperot, be'ina miyuchedet l'shvarim. What does this mean? It means that we both have rights for our fruits to be there, but Ruth and Naomi both have their produce and share this field for produce, but only Naomi's shvarim were allowed there. In other words, they made some partnership agreement. This field we're going to share. Everyone can keep their produce, but only Naomi can keep her oxen there. Ruth is not allowed to bring her oxen there. So if Ruth brings her oxen there, she's obviously going to be obligated because that wasn't part of the deal. Now, dilegabe shein havi lachatzar nizak. So when it comes to shein, it's considered the chatzar nizak, and she's responsible. 1 second. Right. Sorry. Did I just say that wrong? I said it wrong. No, my mistake. If this is chatzar miyuchedet leperot and l'shvarim, right. Sorry. She is going to be obligated. Right. Exactly. Yeah, no, that's exactly because it's considered Naomi's field when it comes to shvarim, right? So it's really Naomi's field. So if Ruth's animals eat there, that's considered she damaged Naomi's field, even though it's joined for produce, but still shvarim are not allowed there. And because shvarim of Ruth's are not allowed, when they come and damage, it's like going into someone else's field. Now, here comes the big proof for saying that this is a good resolution of the contradiction. That really, they don't argue. Each one is a different kind of partnership agreement. Well, notice, and I pointed this out before, the case that said you're exempt said it's like a bik'ah. Now a bik'ah, why are you exempt? Because it's like a bik'ah. It would be a case where it's open to everybody. If it's open to everybody completely, then it's more like Reshut HaRabim, where shein and regel are going to be exempt. So that's why you're going to be exempt. When it talks about where you're obligated, it says it's like a pundak. Now, right? You've ever gone to motels or hotels? Mostly maybe motels, dogs are allowed. Often in hotels, dogs are not allowed, right? Most inns, you're not allowed to bring your shore to an inn. Right? It's not the kind of thing generally you bring your oxen to when you're going out to sleep for the night. So it seems like that would be a better explanation. You do bring food, right? So that would be a better explanation. In that case, when it says you're liable, it's specifically because it's like a pundak, because you're not really allowed to bring your shore. Shmamina. And that is a different way of resolving. Instead of saying these two braitot are two different positions, you can resolve them by saying they're different situations. So now, Matkefla Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera asks the question. If you're going to say that it's in the case that was like Rav Yosef, where we said they shared it when it came to produce, then it's not really like going into somebody else's field. It has to be going into somebody else's field, but you do have part ownership rights to that field. Ruth only owns it partly for produce, so you can't fit that into the words in the pasuk, ubi'er b'ste'acher, and he ate in someone else's field. No. It's all a matter of how you look at it, right? Is it half full or half empty? No, since your shore is not allowed to be there, it is like the shore came in and ate in someone else's field because the shore didn't have rights to be there, even though your produce was allowed to be there. So that's a bit of a debate between Rabbi Zera and Abaye. Is this really considered stay acher or not stay acher? And again, if it's not stay acher, then you're not going to be liable for Shane and Rega. Amalei Rav Achami Difti the Ravina. So what have we done so far? Let's just summarize. We asked a question, Rabbi Elazar, from this Braita of Rav Yosef. We resolved it by saying, I have my own Braita, right? Rabbi Elazar has one Braita, Rav Yosef has another, and end of story. But it's not end of story because the Gemara says, well, maybe those two Braitot don't really contradict. Maybe they're just talking about different situations, and maybe that's the way to resolve it. Then we just had this side thing about Rav Zera and Abaye about, in the case where you said the chayav, is it really stay acher? Because it is joint, and they did have rights, but no, not enough rights, so it is considered stay acher. So now, Amalei Rav Achami Difti the Ravina. If you're already saying that there's one Braita that says chayav and shem v'regel, and one Braita that says you're patur and shem v'regel in this jointly owned property, and in the end you said, well, one is talking about one situation, one is talking about another. Maybe Rav Chisda and Rabbi Elazar, when the one said you're chayav and one said you're patur, also talking about different scenarios. In which case they're not really arguing, right? It's always better if you could say people aren't arguing. I mean, Gemara loves to have people argue, but on the other hand, you could say they really all agree, and maybe they were each talking about a different type of partnership agreement. So why don't you just say that? So Amar Le'in, he says, in fact, you're right. Okay, Ravina says, I agree with you. It's possible they really don't argue. And then he says, Ve'imtim Talomer Pligi. Even if you want to say they don't really argue about the issue we thought they argued about, and there were different partnership agreements, maybe they do still have one disagreement though. If you want to say they're Pligi, Bekusha de Rabbi Zera, Peruka d'Abaye Pligi. Maybe their machloket is between the machloket to Rabbi Zera and Abaye, that if it's jointly, they all agree that if it's jointly owned for everything, you're not liable for damages. But if it's partially owned for this and not for that, right? It's jointly owned for one part, but not for the other, right? It's jointly owned for produce, but not for animals. Then maybe they would have a machloket, Rav Chisda and Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar would say you're exempt because that's not stei achil. And Rav Chisda would say that is stei achil because the shore didn't have rights to go there. So it is considered someone else's field. And maybe that's the machloket between them. So we have three options to how to understand the machloket. Either they really disagree in a joint, right? Fully joint, are you liable or you not? Or they agree if it's fully joint, no one would obligate. And then they agree that if it's partially, you are obligated. Or even in the partially, they disagree, okay? Where they agree about not if fully owned, fully partnership, no. But when it comes to the partly owned, then they have this disagreement. Do we consider that someone else's field or not? So we have three possibilities of understanding the machlok. Now we want to get into that long Braita and talk about some of the cases here. Gufa. So the first line is, if it's Naomi's property, fully, right? Then Ruth's animal comes in and damages, of course she's obligated in everything. Now, again, what could bikol mean versus alakol? Alakol would mean on everything. That means she's liable for everything, which means Shane, Karen, and Regel, okay, which makes sense. But it says bakol, which means even more than that. Not just Shane, Regel, and Karen, but bikule nezek. But she's actually obligated, Ruth, for all damages, meaning full damages, not just Shane, Karen, and Regel. Now, Shane and Regel are always full damages, but Karen, it depends if you're shor tam, shor mu'at. Well, the way they're reading this Mishna now is that because it says bakol and not alakol, but for everything instead of on everything, again, it's a little hard to understand the distinction, especially when you translate into English. But what it means, bakol is for all the damages, which means that even if Ruth's animal had never gored before, if she goes into Naomi's field, the ox, and the ox gores in Naomi's field, then what will happen? Ruth will be obligated full damages. Now, why would this be? Well, this is a shita of Rabbi Tarfon. We're going to see a lot more going forward. Mani Rabbi Tarfon, if you remember, Karen, you pay everywhere, in public domain and private domain, because not expected damages, right? But on the other hand, it is somewhat expected, and you have to be, right? But that's why there's a distinction, shor tam, shor muad. So Rabbi Tarfon says, now the rabbis say shor tam, shor muad anywhere. So if you've never done it before, or you haven't done it 3 times, we're going to basically say, right, you only have to pay half the amount of damage you caused. Once it's already been established that this is a crazy shore, well, then you're obligated full damages. Comes from Tarpon, and he says that's only true outside. But if Ruth's ox, who never did anything before, walks into Naomi's backyard and attacks her shore or kills a person or whatever it might be, that shore, well, killing a person is a little different, but causes damage to a person, to a shore, to whatever, that Ruth is obligated full damages, because what was she doing going into Naomi's courtyard? So now, they assume that that's how this Braita reads, because the Braita says, bakol, full damages. So that sounds like Rabbi Tarfon, who says, Mishuneh Karen, right? It's a Karen, which is atypical, but B'chatzer Nizak has to pay nezek shalem. So if you want to say this Braita holds like Rabbi Tarfon, we're going to have a problem, because the last case in the Braita doesn't hold like Rabbi Tarfon. Now we're going to have to explain the last case in the Braita, which wasn't so clear to us what it meant. Ema seifa lo lezeh v'lo lezeh kigon chatzal she'ena shel shnehem chayav al Hashem v'al haregel. That's a quote from the last case. If it's not this one who owns it, it's not that one who owns it, right? Meaning it's not the chatzer of either one of them. You're liable shem v'regel. My lo lezeh v'lo lezeh. What are we talking about? If it's not Ruth's field, it's not Naomi's field, but it's Yael's field, and Naomi's ox, and so was Ruth's ox, both come into this third field. That is not the ox went into someone else's field. Be'er b'stecher means he went into the Nizak's field. Be'er b'stecher is very clear. It means, the way they understand it, is Ruth's ox went into Naomi's backyard and damaged there. Not that they both met up, both oxen, in someone else's field entirely. So it can't be that, even though that seems like the simple reading. It must be it was only one of them. And whose would it be if you're going to be obligated? It's obviously going to be Naomi's field, because if it's Ruth's field, you're not obligated. So they went into Naomi's field. Now, that makes it the same as the first case, right? Bershut and Izak. Vikatani Seifa, Tam Shalem Chatzi Nezek, Amu Shalem Nezek Shalem. And now it says, if it's a short time, it only pays half damages. Well, case number one said, goes into Naomi's field, pays full damages, like Rabbi Tarfon. This one sounds like the rabbis pay only half damages. Atan the Rabbanit. The Karen damages that are atypical, you only pay half damages even in Naomi's field. So, Reisha Rabbi Tarfon, B'Sefer Rabbanan, could that be that the first part is Rabbi Tarfon and the second part, right? Case number one is Rabbi Tarfon. Case number four is according to the rabbis who disagree with him. That would be very strange. To which he answers him in, yes, it could be. Okay? What's the problem? Yeah, you could say that. Dahamar leShmuel Rav Yehuda, and this we're going to see further on when we have this other case, which we're going to say our Mishna, we actually have a Mishna. We're going to see on Daf Tet Zayin that also looks at the Mishnas, I think, on Daf Tet Vav, where we're going to say the first part sounds like one and the second part sounds like the other. Could this be? Well, Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, Shinina, you wise child, Shvok matnitim b'tah b'chai. Don't worry about the Mishnah, follow me, meaning Reisha Rabbi Tarfon B'Sefer Rabbanan. Even though it seems weird to say this, you can say it there, and likewise, we can then say it here. We can take what Shmuel said there and apply it here, and we're basically going to say case number one is Rabbi Tarfon, case number four is Chachamim, which in the end explains why they're both the same case, because we now explain that they're both him going into the Chatzar and Izak. They're mentioned twice because one is saying Rabbi Tarfon's opinion, one is saying the rabbi's opinion. Okay, which basically, again, the difference is very simple. Karen damages in the Reshut HaNizak, are they immediately full damages? That's Rabbi Tarfon, that's the Reisha. Or do you pay like a regular short time, only half? And that's the fourth case. What's a little weird is if we're going to say they're the same case, they're introduced differently. This is introduced in a weird language. Lo lezeh v'lo lezeh, right? It's weird that it says it that way, but this is one way to read it. Rabbanit Michelle Farber Amar, he explains this differently because it's hard to read it that way. Kula Rabbi Tarfon. He actually says the whole Braita has Rabbi Tarfon's opinion. So how do we explain? Basically, we're going to have to say lo lezeh v'lo lezeh means something different than we thought. Umay lo lezeh v'lo lezeh. Now it's going to be like we said before, but the opposite. We're going to have, if you remember, case three was chatzara shutafim. They both jointly own, which we said jointly own for everything. Okay, and that's why you're going to be obligated in damages. Actually, one second. Chatzara shutafim v'abik'ah. Right. I'm sorry. You're going to be exempt for shein and regel. That's right. That was why. It's fully owned by both, and you're exempt for shein and regel. And this is now, the fourth case is saying, lo lezeh v'lo lezeh, you're obligated in shein v'regel. So why is that? If you look at the chart on today's study guide, you'll help visualize it better. My lo lezeh v'lo lezeh, Lo lezev v'zeh lepeirot ela dechad. Only one of them, Naomi, is allowed to keep her produce there. V'lezev v'lezeh l'shvarim. But both can have their oxen there. So then, if both oxen are allowed to be there, it's the opposite case as we talked about the other time. If both oxen are allowed to be there, then if Ruth damages and only Naomi's fruits were allowed to be there, so that's why it's lo lezev lo lezeh. It's not that they both fully jointly own it, but it's a partial partnership, the opposite of the one we talked about before, which is since Ruth's animals were allowed to be there, Naomi should have realized it was going to eat their produce, and therefore, right, and therefore, no, since, just think for a second, right, since only her produce is there, right, but the shvarim were allowed, so Ruth is actually going to be responsible because she knew that only Naomi's produce was allowed to be there. She was supposed to prevent the animal from eating Naomi's produce, and therefore she's obligated to legabe shein havi lechatzar nizak, because when it comes to shein, it's only chatzar nizak, because she didn't have rights to have her produce there. Legabe Karen havi lav rabim. But since her shore was allowed to be there, not her produce, but her shore was, when it comes to Karen and the shore damages, it's like being in Rishut Rabim. And there, even Rabbi Tarfon will agree that it's only half damages. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. Ihachi arba'a shlosha havu. But if you explain it this way, then it's not really 4 cases. Because, well, it's not really 4 rules. Gemara said it was 4 rules. It's not really 4 rules, because if you say gabe shein, it's chatzar nizak, then that's case number 1. And if you say by Karen, it's like chatzar shutafin, that's case number 3, where they were shutafin. So you could have easily derived, it's a different case, but you could have easily derived it from the combination of 1 and 3. And therefore, why did it say 4? So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, moving out Amabet, shlosha klalot ba'arba'a mekomot. There's 3 rules, but in 4 cases. Okay, so it's true, it's not really 4 rules, because it said arba'a klalot. It's not 4 rules, it's 4 cases that really are based on 3 rules. Okay, which is, again, what the rules are really in the domain of, right, if it's in public, shein and regel are not chayav. If it's in private, shein and regel are chayavim. If it's, right, and then kind of what's considered public, what's considered private, partnership, this, that. Karen, you're obligated even in Rishut Rabim. But Karen and Rishut Nizak is only is full damages, right? Even if it's a short time. So those are the basic rules. And they just come out in 4 cases. Okay, so let's do a summary of the daf until this point. We started with, what is that line shizik chava mazik coming to include if we hold like Rav, that it's not coming for Karen, and if we don't hold like the other reading of the line before that, then we're going to say it's coming to include shomrim. We had to establish which case. It's when you're watching someone's animal, but you're not protecting them from damages, and then their animal damaged your stuff. So then they're obligated to pay. And then if you did accept damages, the second part of that braita was, remember we brought a braita to prove this, was saying, well, then you're not obligated if you did accept damages if it happened at night. Then we moved on to understanding Rabbi Elazar and the machloket he has with Rav Chisda, and we brought a question. Isn't there a braita against him? To which we brought another braita that supports him. And then we said, okay, there's these 2 braita. Well, in theory, they contradict each other, and we resolved it in a different way. Instead of saying they're 2 different opinions, we could have said, oh, that one is really one type of partnership, and this is a different kind of partnership, and they used the word that went with the partnership to kind of prove the difference between a pundak and a bik'ah. And then we went into a little bit more in detail about that, and then because we brought this braita that was supposedly brought this for Rabbi Elazar, we then went into some of the other cases trying to understand what are those cases. Now we're getting to the next Mishnah. We have a Mishnah kind of like the previous one. If you remember, the previous Mishnah on Daf Tet started out with all this stuff about we didn't understand what they were talking about. Again, we're going to have a Mishnah that's not really very clear. I'm not even going to really explain all the cases. We'll explain them as we go along. The Gemara is going to go into each one and say, what are we talking about here? But now we're talking about how you collect the money for damages. So shum kesef, you evaluate it in money. Shaveh kesef, you pay it in something that's worth money. Bifnei beit din, you do it before a court. Al pi edim, you do it with witnesses. B'nei cholim, they're Jewish. They're free, meaning not slaves. B'nei brit, they're Jewish, not Gentiles, meaning the edim, right? This is talking about the edim are free people and Jewish people. Hanashim, or at least I think, right? Actually, no. Maybe it's talking about the avadim. Yeah, it is about the edim. Okay. Hanashim b'chlal hanezek. If you damage women, you have to pay as well. In other words, if a woman owns property, you damage her property, you have to pay her. If you damage a woman, right? Women and men are equal in this kind of area. We'll get back to that further on. Nizak v'mazik b'tashlumin. Okay, this means that both the nizak and the mazik sometimes are joint in the payment. That really doesn't make sense. Why would the nizak pay? We're going to explain later what that means. So none of this really makes sense. Let's start one by one. My shum kesef. What does it mean? You evaluated money. So Amar of Yehuda, shum ze lo yehe ela b'kesef. When you evaluate how much value in damages, you give a money, a number to it. You say, this is $100 worth of damage, okay, or 100 zuzim, or whatever it is. Okay, Tanina lahad tana Rabbanan. Well, this is supported by the following bright. Now we'll think, what else might you have thought? It's a little bit of a strange case, but parash yizika talit. If a para, let's say, eats my cloak, v'talit yizika para, or the cloak attacks an animal somehow, ein omrim tetzei para b'talit b'para. Okay, so if my para damaged your talit, you don't say, okay, well, I'll just take the para. Okay, or if my talit damaged your para, you don't say, I'll just take your talit in replace, to replace the damages. So, right, it sounds a little strange. On the other hand, in a world that was very much a barter system, maybe you could say that, okay, this damaged that, I'll just take this. Okay, you don't say that. Ela shamino tabadamin. No, you evaluate how much damage was caused and you pay based on the damage, right? It wouldn't make sense that you would take a para for a talit that got damaged. A para is probably worth a lot more than a talit. Or perhaps, maybe you have a very fancy talit and your para wasn't very, para that damaged it wasn't worth so much, or maybe you want, right? You don't do that. You just evaluate it for how much it's worth. Shvei kesef. Now you pay in something that's valued as money. Ditanu Rabbanan, as it says in a Braita, kesef melamed she'ein beitin nizkakim ela nechasim sheyesh lam achrayut. What it means by shvei kesef, it means something that's valued in money, which is land, right? Land, it has to be something that's not money. Land is not money, but it has value of money. So that's what we mean by shvei kesef, which means that the courts can only collect damages from property. Aval im kidam nizak v'tapas metaltalin. We're going to, by the way, say this isn't true. Okay, so just hold off. I know it doesn't sound right based on other things we learned. Don't worry. But im kidam nizak v'tapas metaltalin beitin govin lo mehem. But if, let's say, Naomi already took something of Ruth's, when Ruth's ox damaged her property or damaged her shore, whatever it was, Naomi goes, grabs some movable property of Ruth, then we don't remove it from her hands. Okay, we let her keep it if it was, the value of the damage that was done. So now we're going to go back and say, how did you get from shvei kesef to land, like that term? Amar shvei kesef melamed she'ein beitin nizkakim le'ela nechasim sheyesh lam achrayut. The beitin can only, so again, if Naomi takes the law into her own hands and grabs metaltalin, we leave it in her hands, even though we're not so pro people taking action in their own hands, although we will get to sugyas about it in Sanhedrin. Are you allowed to, not allowed to, all that. But if she does, we leave it. But otherwise, the beitin can only collect land. So first, they want to know my mashma. How do you get that shvei kesef means money? Means land. Amar Rabba Ula. Well, what's shvei kesef? We're actually going to have three interpretations. The first two we're going to reject. Davar hashaveh kol kesef. It means something that's worth any amount of money. Meaning what? Ma'nihu davar she'en lo ana'at. Means something that if you overcharge for, we don't cancel it, because land can be worth anything. It fluctuates tremendously. And if you sell it for a way overpriced or way underpriced, either side can't come back and claim, oh, that was a mistake. So that's why it's called shvei kesef, because it's worth any money, because you could sell it for any money without getting it back, and saying there was a mistake, to which they reject, because they say, also, if you sell an eved, a slave, or you sell a deed, like I have an IOU and I sell it to you for way overpriced or way underpriced, there's no ona either. So then shvei kesef should be also those, and it's not. Second interpretation, something that's bought with money. Because usually a kinyan is by pulling, not by giving the money. That doesn't affect the acquisition. But so same thing. They would also be on the list then. Has to be something that's valued at money but isn't actually money. Any movable property is considered money. Why is it considered money? Because I can sell it anywhere. If I can't sell it here, I'll go sell it somewhere else. I was thinking put it up on eBay if you have something to sell, right? You can always find someone in the world who will buy it. Whereas land, you won't necessarily. If nobody wants to live in this place, you're not going to be able to sell land, right? Like try to sell something in the south of the country right now, right? Or right on the border of Lebanon. Nobody's going to want to buy that right now. And you won't be able to go go sell it somewhere else, right? It's land. No one somewhere else in the world is going to want to buy it. So that's why it's shvei kesef is something that's not valued at money. It can be, but it's not as easily turned into money as other things. So that's how we got to shvei kesef means land. Now we have to go to the basic law though. Rami le Rabbi Yehuda bar Chinan ala Rav Huna bar Rabbi Yoshua. But wait, Tana shvei kesef from which means you can only collect from land. But it says in a Braita, Yashiv lerabot shvei kesef afilu b'subin. Remember we saw that by the board. It says kesef yashiv leba'alav. Yashiv came to explain even subin you could pay bran. So it sounds like you don't need to pay with only land. When they said you can only collect from property, they meant from orphans. If orphans inherited a chov, a debt of their fathers, you can only collect that debt if the father left land, and only from land the father left to them. If the father didn't leave land, or if you don't want the land, you want to take something else, you can't. Only land. But then the next part doesn't make sense. If the father owed land and the creditor comes to the kids and grabs metaltalin, then we leave it. That's not true with Yitomi. We don't leave it. Right? They shouldn't. Right? If it's Yitomi, you can't collect from metaltalin. Even if you did, we make you give it back. So Rava said in the name of Rav Nachman, somewhere else he answered this question, and we're going to copy and paste it here. If the father owed money, then the kids got the chov, but it turns out that before the father died, the creditor had already taken, the one who was damaged had already taken something from the father, okay, and was holding metaltalin. Then we let them keep it, okay, but not if the father, right, not if nothing was collected before the father died. So that's how you would explain the Mishna, that line in the Braita, sorry. Bifnei beitin. So what is bifnei beitin? If you sold your property and then went to court, you wouldn't pay. To which the Gemara says, what? Wait a minute. What is nichasim mishuabadim if not this, right? If nichasim are mishubad to a chov, which means property is lien to if you lent me money, my property is lien to it. So even if I sell it, I still have to pay. Shouldn't that be the same thing for damages? And they assume it is. And therefore, how could you possibly say this? So if I owe you now because I damaged your property and then I sold my land, well, of course that land is lien to the loan, to the not right, just like it would be lien to the loan, it's lien to this obligation. So Ela pratla beitin et yotot. So bifnei beitin doesn't mean that the land has to be in front of the court and has to be in my possession at the time of the ruling. No, what it means is that who assesses the value of what I owe you? It can't be beitin of hedyotot. It has to be a beitin of experts. Why? Well, the Rashi says that what we're talking here is some of the payments are knas payments, like kefel, for example, right? Parts of damages are fines, not actual damage like cost. That can only be evaluated by mumchim. Okay, we don't allow hedyotot, simple, like get any three people and they make a court. Sometimes we allow that, but not for this. Last thing, al pi'edim, prat lemodeh knas, again, talking about knas. If it's a knas like kefel, let's say I come forward and I say, I stole from you. So the law is to get me to confess, I only have to pay the value of what I stole. I don't have to pay the knas. But what's it saying al pi'edim? Well, what if I was modeh knas and then 2 minutes later in walk witnesses? Right? Which you could say, maybe I knew the witnesses were coming and that's why I admitted it, right? So what if I admit and then witnesses come after? Shu patul. So this is what it's saying, al pi'edim. Only by witnesses will I have to pay knas, not if I came and admitted first, even if edim came late. So they say, this is actually a machloket. So our Mishnah fits with the one who says you're exempt. But the one who holds that actually you'll be obligated in that case. So why does the Mishnah say al pi'edim? And for the answer to that question, you'll have to wait tomorrow. So again, to review this part, shum kesef, we said it's evaluated the value in money, not in, right? It's not a barter system we use here. Shvei kesef, we said you pay in land. Bifnei beitin means, and by the way, we said in the end, you pay in land is only yatomim. Other people you can pay also with, you can make them pay in movable property. Bifnei beitin meant the beitin does the assessments of the knas payments. And al-piyedim so far meant, at least according to one interpretation, it means if witnesses came, we can obligate you knas, but if you admitted it first, we won't obligate you to pay any of those penalties, the fines. Okay, yes, the regular payment, but not the penalties. Okay, that's it for today. Wishing everybody a good day. Looking for good news.